Before we begin today's episode, we want to acknowledge that we'll be discussing cultural stress, social tension, and the emotional weight many Americans are feeling right now. These topics can hit close to home. Our goal isn't to inflame, it's to explore. If you're feeling overwhelmed by headlines, politics, or rapid change, know that you're not alone. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and approach the conversation thoughtfully.
When did normal disappear? Not gradually, not politely. It feels like somewhere between 24-hour news cycles, social media outrage, rising grocery bills, global conflicts, cultural division, and digital overload, the ground shifted beneath us. And now, even on quiet days, there's this low hum of tension in the background. You wake up, check your phone, and before your feet hit the floor, you've absorbed global conflict updates, economic anxiety, trending controversies, and someone yelling at someone else online. It wasn't always like this, or at least it didn't feel like this. Disagreement used to stay at dinner tables. Politics used to be background noise unless it was election season. Global events felt distant. Now everything feels immediate, personal, amplified. And the question a lot of Americans are quietly asking isn't partisan. It's not red or blue. It's this: when did life start feeling this chaotic? Because if you're honest, it's not just one thing. It's the speed. It's the volume. It's the constant feeling that the world is one headline away from another shift. And that constant state of alert, it changes people. It changes culture. It changes how we treat each other. That's what we're unpacking tonight. All right, let's bring in the crew because this one hits different. Brian's here, and I know he's going to argue that a lot of what people call chaos is actually moral drift and leadership weakness catching up to us. Rachel's here to ground the conversation and separate emotional perception from measurable reality. Daniel is probably going to argue that the acceleration isn't accidental, that systems benefit from keeping people distracted, divided, and digitally dependent. And Skylar is going to push the angle that cultural shifts are often growing pains, that what feels like chaos may actually be transformation. And me, I'm here asking the question a lot of people are whispering but not saying out loud. Are we exhausted because things are actually worse, or because we're exposed to everything all the time? Let's get into it. All right, let's slow this down for a minute because this question, when did normal disappear, isn't political at its core. It's emotional, it's psychological. It's something people feel when they're driving home in silence after work, when they're scrolling late at night, when they're standing in the grocery aisle doing math in their head. Think about the last 5 years. Pandemic lockdowns, school closures, mask fights, economic whiplash, culture wars that went from online debates to family fractures, AI acceleration, remote work shifts, rising prices, global conflicts streaming live to our phones, and through all of it, no pause, no reset, just constant forward motion. There used to be seasons to life, election seasons, news cycles, cultural moments that came and went. Now everything overlaps. You can't separate local from global, serious from trivial, policy from personality. Your phone vibrates and suddenly you're absorbing a crisis from across the planet while sitting in your living room. That changes how a person experiences normal. And here's the thing. I don't think most Americans are looking for perfection. They're looking for stability, predictability, a sense that tomorrow isn't going to feel like a plot twist. And whether you're left, right, independent, Gen X, millennial, whatever, there's this low hum in the background that says something feels off. So the real question tonight isn't who do we blame? It's what actually changed. Is this just technology compressing reality? Is this cultural drift? Is it economic pressure? Is it political chaos? Or are we just overstimulated beyond what the human brain was built to process? Rachel, let me start with you, because you tend to zoom out before zooming in. Are we romanticizing the past? Or has something objectively shifted in how Americans experience daily life?
I think something has objectively shifted, but it may not be what people assume. We tend to romanticize the past because memory filters out background noise and keeps the highlights. Every generation has faced instability, wars, economic crashes, cultural upheaval. The difference now isn't necessarily that life is more chaotic. It's that chaos is delivered to us continuously, personally, and without pause. For most of modern history, information came in contained doses. You read the paper. You watched the evening news. Then you lived your life. Now your phone doesn't allow that separation. You wake up, and before your feet hit the floor, you've absorbed global conflict updates, market volatility, political outrage, social controversy, and maybe even a personal argument from someone you barely know. That constant input doesn't give the brain time to reset. And when your nervous system never resets, everything feels amplified. A disagreement feels existential. A policy shift feels catastrophic. A global event feels immediate. We're not just informed, we're saturated. And saturation creates fatigue. So yes, something has changed. But I don't think it's simply that society collapsed overnight. I think our exposure level has skyrocketed beyond what human beings were wired to handle. And when exposure increases without boundaries, normal starts to feel unstable, even if parts of life haven't actually changed as dramatically as it seems.
Rachel, I think that's powerful because it suggests the sensation of instability might be as much neurological as it is cultural. We're absorbing more inputs than any generation before us. But here's where I want to push this a little. Because there are people listening right now who don't just feel overstimulated. They feel like the guardrails actually moved. They feel like expectations around family, faith, education, even basic social norms have shifted dramatically in a short amount of time. And to them, it's not just tech overload, it's cultural drift. Brian, let me bring you in. When people say normal disappeared, do you see that primarily as technological overload like Rachel described? Or do you believe something deeper shifted in American culture itself?
Artie, I agree with Rachel that technology amplified everything, but I don't think amplification explains the root of what people are feeling. You can't just blame the volume knob if the song itself changed. What a lot of Americans are reacting to isn't just information overload. It's the speed at which foundational norms have been questioned, rewritten, or dismissed altogether. For decades, there were certain cultural anchors most people shared, not politically, but structurally. Family mattered. Faith communities existed in neighborhoods. Schools focused on fundamentals. Disagreements stayed mostly local. Now institutions that used to feel stable feel contested. And when the institutions feel unstable, people feel unstable. I think what many Americans are sensing is not chaos. It's drift. Moral drift, leadership drift, cultural drift. When you remove shared guardrails, even slowly, the result isn't immediate collapse. It's uncertainty. People don't necessarily want everyone to agree. They want something solid to stand on. And when definitions, expectations, and norms feel like they change every 6 months, that sense of footing disappears. Technology poured gasoline on it, sure, but the spark wasn't the phone. It was a broader shift in what we value, how we define responsibility, and whether institutions are reinforcing stability or experimenting with it. That's why people say normal disappeared, because for them, the baseline moved.
Brian, that's a sharp distinction. Amplification versus alteration. It's one thing to say we're seeing more. It's another to say what we're seeing has fundamentally changed. And here's where it gets interesting. If you combine Rachel's argument, constant exposure, with Brian's argument, shifting cultural guardrails, you get something bigger. Acceleration. Not just more information, not just cultural shift, but accelerated shift. Daniel, you've talked before about systems benefiting from speed, from keeping people reactive instead of reflective. So let me ask you this. Is this just organic change happening fast? Or is there something structural about the modern information ecosystem that keeps us in a constant state of instability?
Artie, acceleration is the key word. Change has always existed. Cultural evolution is normal. Technological innovation is normal. Political realignment is normal. What's not normal is the velocity. And velocity changes how human beings experience reality. We are living inside systems that are designed, intentionally or not, to reward speed, outrage, and emotional reaction. Social media platforms prioritize engagement. News outlets compete for attention. Algorithms push what triggers response. The faster something spreads, the more valuable it becomes within that system. Stability doesn't trend. Calm doesn't go viral. Nuance doesn't dominate timelines. So what happens? People are kept in a heightened state, not necessarily because someone is sitting in a room plotting chaos, but because the architecture of the information ecosystem incentivizes emotional spikes. And when emotional spikes become daily routine, people start mistaking volatility for normal. And here's the deeper layer. When citizens are constantly reacting, they have less bandwidth to think long-term. Long-term thinking requires stillness. It requires space. It requires stepping back from the feed. But the feed never stops. So society becomes reactive instead of reflective. And a reactive society feels unstable, even if the structural foundations haven't completely collapsed. So, to answer your question, I don't think instability is purely organic. I think it's amplified by a system that thrives on attention, and attention is easiest to capture when people feel unsettled.
Daniel, that's unsettling in its own way, not because it suggests conspiracy, but because it suggests architecture, that maybe instability isn't just accidental, but incentivized. And if you combine that with what Brian said about shifting norms and what Rachel said about exposure overload, you get a culture that feels like it's constantly moving under your feet. Skylar, I want to bring you in here because some would argue that what feels like chaos is actually transformation. That we're living through social and technological shifts that are uncomfortable but necessary. From your perspective, is this decline or evolution?
I think what we're experiencing is transformation. But transformation rarely feels comfortable while you're inside it. Every major shift in history has felt destabilizing to the people living through it. The Industrial Revolution disrupted work and family structures. The Civil Rights era disrupted social norms. The internet disrupted information flow. And now we're in a phase where technology, identity, and global interconnectedness are all colliding at once. When people say normal disappeared, I hear something deeper. I hear grief for familiarity. Familiar structures gave predictability. Predictability feels safe, but safety and growth don't always move together. Some of the cultural changes that feel chaotic to one generation feel liberating to another. Expanded conversations about identity, mental health awareness, remote work flexibility, these are shifts that some view as erosion and others view as progress. That doesn't mean everything is healthy. Acceleration can be destabilizing. Institutions can overcorrect. Technology can outpace ethics. But I hesitate to frame this moment purely as moral decline. It may be cultural recalibration. The challenge is whether we can navigate that recalibration without tearing each other apart in the process. And I think part of the exhaustion people feel comes from fighting every change is existential, not every shift is collapse. Some are adjustment. The question is which ones strengthen society and which ones fracture it.
See, that's where I wrestle with this, because I agree that transformation doesn't automatically equal decline. I agree that some of what feels chaotic is just evolution happening in real time, but I also think there's a real danger in pretending speed doesn't carry cost. Here's what I see. We've built a culture that rewards immediacy over depth, reaction over reflection, signal over substance. And when that becomes the dominant rhythm of society, people lose their footing, not because they can't adapt, but because they're never given a stable platform to adapt from. Stability isn't about sameness, it's about shared reference points. It's about knowing that even if we disagree, we agree on something foundational. Truth matters, family matters, community matters, country matters, and when those shared anchors feel contested or negotiable, people don't just feel uncomfortable, they feel unmoored. And here's the part I think we can't ignore. Humans are not wired for perpetual alert mode. Our nervous systems aren't designed for constant outrage cycles. They're not designed for absorbing global conflict, economic anxiety, and cultural battles before breakfast. That kind of stimulation changes how we interact. It makes patience thinner. It makes empathy harder. It makes disagreement feel existential. So when people say normal disappeared, I don't hear a political slogan. I hear exhaustion. I hear people saying, I don't recognize the rhythm of life anymore. And that doesn't mean progress is bad. It means progress without pause feels destabilizing. Maybe the answer isn't going backward. Maybe it isn't doubling down on speed either. Maybe it's intentionally building margin in a culture that refuses to create it. Margin in our conversations, margin in our media consumption, margin in how quickly we label each other. Because if acceleration is inevitable, and it probably is, then resilience becomes the skill set. Resilience isn't yelling louder, it's thinking longer, it's listening deeper, it's not allowing every algorithm-fed outrage to hijack your emotional bandwidth. And I think that's where the opportunity is, not to restore some perfect version of the past, but to create stability inside motion. The world isn't slowing down, the information isn't shrinking, the transformation isn't reversing. But fragmentation isn't guaranteed either. We get to decide whether speed defines us or whether maturity steadies us. That's the question.
All right, before we head into final thoughts, let's take a quick second to talk about the community that makes conversations like this possible. Data and Dissonance has always been about engaging tough topics without shouting over each other. It's about thinking deeper instead of reacting faster. And if that resonates with you, we've built a merch line that reflects that same mindset. From the Gen X designs to the bold bumper stickers like Make Orwell Fiction Again and Keep Your Feelings Off My Freedoms, everything is designed for people who value independent thought and aren't afraid to represent it. And of course, the coffee blends, High Lakes Light Roast, Rock Creek Medium, and Bitterroot Dark French Roast, roasted right here in the USA. If we're going to slow down and think longer, we might as well do it with strong coffee. You can find everything at the website and merch store. Every purchase supports independent content and helps keep these conversations going. And we're grateful for every single one of you who's part of this community.
You know, I've been thinking about this question a lot. Not just for the show, but personally. When did normal disappear? And the more I sit with it, the more I realize maybe what we're grieving isn't a perfect past. Maybe we're grieving predictability. There was a time when life felt compartmentalized. Work was work, home was home. News was something you consumed at a set time and then put away. You could disagree with someone and still share a meal without it becoming a referendum on your identity. That rhythm felt stable. And now, everything overlaps. Work emails hit your phone at dinner. Global crises break while you're in line at the grocery store. Social debates unfold in your family group chat. The lines between public and private, local and global, serious and trivial, they've all blurred. I don't think that means we're doomed. I don't think it means society collapsed, but I do think it means we have to be intentional about how we live inside this new pace. You can't control acceleration. You can't stop technological progress. You can't rewind cultural shifts, but you can control how much you let it consume you. You can choose margin. You can choose long conversations over short reactions. You can choose to assume good faith before assuming evil intent. You can choose to turn the phone off for an hour and remember that your actual life, the one in front of you, is usually more stable than your feed makes it seem. Maybe normal didn't disappear. Maybe it just requires more effort now. And maybe the strength of this next chapter isn't about returning to what was. It's about learning how to stand steady in what is. The world is loud, the pace is fast, the change is real. But clarity is still possible. Stability is still buildable. And community is still stronger than any algorithm. Remember to speak truth, stir thought.
Today's episode of Data and Dissonance is brought to you by the Caleb Rourke Thriller series. Stories that explore power, pressure, moral tension, and the kind of high-stakes decisions we've been talking about tonight. If you're drawn to conversations about instability, leadership, global dynamics, and the personal cost behind big decisions, you'll want to check out The Covenant Protocol and The Prophet Directive. These novels dive into the world behind the headlines, intelligence networks, hidden agendas, and the human weight of national security choices. And Book 3, Black Echo Rising, is on the way. It's also brought to you by the music, the album Uncaged, raw, independent energy, and Four Wheelers and Hallelujah, grounded, faith-driven country storytelling about resilience, family, and conviction. Plus the single Stand Tall Charlie, a reminder that standing firm in your beliefs isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. You can find the books on Amazon, the music on Spotify, and all major platforms, and everything connected to the show at the website. Independent stories, independent music, independent thought. And that's what we're building here.